Shalom Aleichem Rabbi, and welcome once again to the most powerful 13 minutes on radio, the abbreviated version of the Fear Kashis, heard each and every week in New York on Talkline Communications Network, 6:20 a.m. radio Wednesday evenings at 8 o'clock. Spread the word about this Torah revolution. Tell your friends to listen in. If you have a header for the internet, you can find many programs archived and videoed on the Fear, F-E-A-R, Kashis, K-A-S-H-E-S.com. I am your host, Rabbi Yehuda Levin, and let the proceedings begin. I want to say that I personally participated at a meeting as an advocate for a father at the offices of the ACS. This has to do with the city agency that deals with so-called protection of children and families. Participating in the meeting was a caseworker from Ohel, as well as her supervisor, who wasn't that familiar with the case. I was allowed to come in as an advocate for the father/husband. And basically, I could say it was like a kangaroo court, where there was a decision made in advance, basically to get the father out of the house and to issue an order of protection against the father. This was done on Thursday afternoon, these proceedings, and they insisted on going to court on Friday, on Erev Shabbos. The Ohel ladies claimed that they said, listen, it should try to be done early. At 2:15, after being there for 4 hours and 15 minutes, the father had to leave in order to make it for Shabbos. The mother was allowed to leave earlier, and the father notified the clerk. Yet instead of waiting until Monday, they went to the judge without the father present and got a temporary order of protection. I want you to know that I found the Ohel caseworker to be a liar, a prevaricator, who said she wasn't taking any position and she had to see the situation. And that was at that meeting, at the beginning of the meeting, she told me that. Yet at a certain point, she had to come down very hard, listing all kinds of things about the father in order to justify not only getting him out of the house, but also an order of protection between him and his wife, although his wife insisted to these parties that he was not a physical threat and that she didn't feel that the verbal and emotional abuse, so-called, these psychobabble terms that they use, there is such a thing as verbal and emotional abuse. The question is, to what extent, how high does it rise? And does that mean you issue an order of protection against the father for this? This is very terrible. Very terrible. I'm saying, Adis, it was really disgusting and one-sided, and I would be very afraid of putting a Jewish, a frum family in the hands of old caseworkers. I'm not saying this categorically, but in many cases, they do terrible things. And over the coming weeks and months, I will document for you some of the horrific things they do. And I just want to point out, it is alleged that the way the system works is the more Ohel or any other Jewish social service agency shows that there's a pressing need for the services because of statistics, the more government funding they can apply for in the coming year. So in effect, there might be a reason for Ohel to get fathers out of homes. See, look, we had to get these terrible Orthodox fathers out of the home. See, we had to get an order of protection against them. It was so bad that when I turned to the, by the way, there were no men there except for myself. This was decided basically by 3 or 4 ladies, 3 ladies, black women. I say this not for racial reasons, but because they totally do not understand the Orthodox Jewish community. And an old lady and her supervisor, who claimed she didn't really know anything about the case. When I asked, what is the order of protection? Who is it against? Is it against all the children, that the father can't have any contact with all the children in the household? They said, no, just the mother and this one child. So the question is, why not the rest of the children? If he's emotionally and verbally abusive, did they check that he's not emotionally and verbally abusive to any of the others? The answer is they use that situation of the child. So they couldn't possibly say it should just be for the mother and not for the child, because their whole way of getting into the situation, Ohel, was because of something that happened with the child. So what I'm trying to say is it's illogical. And when I asked, the Ohel supervisor and the caseworker didn't know who the ACS personnel who were meeting with them, how many people in the household the order of protection applied to such an extent that the supervisor had to turn to the woman supervisor of Ohel, had to turn to the woman supervisor of ACS and say, well, the rabbi's asking a legitimate question. Who is the order of protection for? You understand? I'm telling you, it was really, really terrible, terrible, sad. Does that mean the husband's and father's a tzaddik? No. Does that mean maybe he shouldn't be out of the house? Maybe he should. But this wasn't what they were there for. And to throw him out and to try to get him out that he has to leave right before Shabbos, even though the mother claims, the mother/wife, who doesn't get along with the father, claims that she was begging them not to do this. And they were saying, we know better than you. He's an abuser. He has to go out. And then I asked her the question, how come you're letting him go home tonight until the court proceedings? If he's such a clear and evident danger, why isn't he a danger even for a short amount of time? The whole thing is a bluff, and you have to be mispalel that you don't fall into the hands, not of the ACS and not of Ohel. Moving right along, there's some news that the reggae singer Baal Tshuva and former Lubavitcher Matis Yohu, who so many Orthodox kids started to follow and go after, and as I explained, it's to our detriment when these Balei Tshuva come in and they bring all their chazarai, they bring it into the frum community. Years ago, a person who I like very much, but also, with all due respect to him, there was Piamenta, and one summer, around 10 years ago, there was a whole thing that he was going to a certain dance club, and he was playing, and he was having people jump into the mosh pit. That means they used to stand on the stage, and then they would jump off, and they'd be caught by the crowd. The whole thing, and they write in the New York Times that he was like the Jewish Jimi Hendrix. All of this we don't need. All of this kind of chazarai we don't need. So hip hip hooray that Matis Yohu shaved off his beard. And the further away he gets from Yiddishkeit, the better it is for us and for many kids. Recently, we learned that Nefesh International held mental health professionals held their annual convention, and this time this Levovitz guy who spoke at YU, and he outed himself when he spoke at YU a year ago at that terrible, terrible gathering where they were making light and jokes, and the crowd of 700 or so were tittering to hear them describe and to try to evoke sympathy of the fact that they have a homosexual lifestyle and they're suffering, etc. He now has gone on to the next stage, and at this ostensibly Orthodox mental health professionals group, he had a table there distributing his Jewish queer youth propaganda. And says Mr. Levovitz in an interview in JTA, which appeared in the Jewish press, JQU, Jewish Queer Youth, doesn't challenge anything in the Torah. We understand there are some acts that are halachically problematic, but we believe that the gays can be openly themselves and still be a part of the community and their families, which Rav David Cohen came out against this. But the question is, and we're calling here for an investigation, either by outside people, outside rabbinic groups or Torah leaders, or by the organization itself. How was Levovitz and the Jewish queer youth given a table in the Nefesh gathering? And this does not augur well. Perhaps it's time to issue another public apology to Rav Avigdor Miller Zatzal and to me as his emissary, because Rabbi Avigdor Miller was prescient when he spent all this time and he was agitating against this, and he warned that as long as we're machabed politicians who make laws that encourage the homosexual agenda, and he said this back in the 80s, we're going to continue to have more and more child molestation. And now we see things that the article brings down. As I mentioned, that last year a gay Shabbaton was held in Connecticut and it attracted more than 150 guests. In the summer of 2010, a group of more than 156 so-called Orthodox rabbis and mental health professionals wrote a pro-homosexual declaration about how you have to respect them and tolerate them in the shuls, even when they openly identify them and their quote-unquote families. And it's going from bad to worse. I call for this investigation, and people should demand, and they should contact Rav David Cohen and demand an investigation to find out, and Simcha Foyman writes in the Jewish press, how did such a slip up happen. How did this happen? But this is a sign of what's going on, the corruption in the Torah and Orthodox community. 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, at this point, on the Zev Brenner program, a panel consisting of Rabbi Gluck Jr., I forget his first name, who did an excellent job, and Rabbi Blau, who spoke about the stupidity of Mr. Rabbi Frankfurter of Ami magazine. Remember when he was fighting with Solomon and trying to say, it's an accusation, it's like a blood libel against the Orthodox Jewish community. What are you talking about? Everybody there on that program disagreed. And since Frankfurter wasn't on it, there were many things accomplished on the program, and it was really, really an eye-opener. But the elephant in the room that they refused to address, they didn't refuse because they were offered, but they didn't get to address it, and they probably would avoid addressing it. The elephant in the room, the unspoken problem was that you can't dance on two chasnas as long as you continue to support the politicians. Who is funding a lot of this stuff, including the program? A gentleman by the name of Mark Appel. Mark Appel made his money by courting liberal Democrats and running various government programs, anti-drug addiction, etc., etc. And he became basically a philanthropist, multimillionaire, who for various reasons is sensitized against child abuse, and this is a positive thing. But if you would ask Mark Appel or some of the other people there to come out and condemn these liberal politicians who make these chukei te'eva, including homosexual marriage, and create a dense atmosphere of tumah, and we would ask Mark Appel or others to see the connection. Ask Mr. Gluck, Rabbi Gluck Jr., if he could see the connection. Ask Rabbi Blau. That as long as you vote and support these politicians, it's business as usual. And Hamodia honors these politicians by writing about them. As long as this continues, we're going to continue to have more and more child abuse. You can make 100 meetings and you could do great things and have great radio programs and out people, and we're going to still have that problem. Here you have an article that appeared in Ami magazine on November the 30th, 2011, 4th Kislev, in which Rabbi Emanuel Feldman writes a 2-page article, beautiful article, Non-Traditional Marriages and You, Why We Can't Ignore This Issue. Towards the end of the article, Rabbi Feldman says, yeah, the people in the 9th Congressional District who elected Turner, they knew, they did it. They knew it was for this reason. But this is a bunch of baloney, Rabbi Feldman, and I challenge you to say openly that it is halachically forbidden to vote for any politicians who support this agenda. If not, everything you're preaching here, Rabbi Feldman, about how this is nogeya to us and how dangerous this is, will come to naught. And the fact is, nobody is willing to say the truth. We got to stop mollycoddling and chanfening these politicians. This is Rabbi Yehuda Levin. Spread the word, keep the faith, and a guten tamid.